always thought that would be a great idea to do with the Holocaust, to have a year-long course that deals with the history, memory, representation, literary representation, filmic representation of the Holocaust. But we couldn't do it because we didn't have a historian who taught the Holocaust. And then recently we hired Annika Valke, and immediately I thought this is our chance.
I had always wanted to learn more about the Holocaust, always been interested in it, and never had that opportunity in high school. So it was perfect for me, and then the trip sounded like an amazing plan. And although I knew it was going to be a lot of work because I've never done anything like it, I thought it would be the best opportunity for me during my freshman year to experience.
When I came to WashU, I heard about these focus programs, and I've always been very, very interested in World War II, specifically the Holocaust, just because it was a subject that I thought I could understand, but the more and more I would read on it, I realized there was so much I didn't know, and I just couldn't fathom how an event like this could be possible. So when I heard there was a focus course on it, I said, I have to take it, especially because I'm from South America. It's something that's very kind of far from us, and it's not something that's very much taught in our history. And I've always wanted to go to the camps, and I've always really wanted to delve into the subject, but I knew, given my family, my background, it wasn't something that they would take me to. So I thought this was a perfect opportunity to embark on that adventure.
All four of my grandparents are actually Holocaust survivors, so I've grown up learning a lot about the Holocaust in Hebrew school and just talking to them about it. So it was something I felt fairly knowledgeable about, but it's something I wanted to learn more about and kind of learn more aspects on it, because I kind of just knew the stories of my grandparents and not necessarily the stories of a lot of other people who also had similar experiences as they did. Another bonus about the trip for me was that I was able to see my great-grandfather's stumbling stone. It was put in November of 2015, and the rest of my family got to go to Germany and experience seeing the stone. And I know for them it was a very emotional experience, and I was extremely disappointed that I wasn't able to go. But when we got to Europe, my professors really made it a priority to be able to go see the stone, which was amazing. And I feel like I had that same emotional experience that my family was able to experience. And although I wasn't there with my family, because I was so close with the class and so close with the professors, I really felt like very comfortable, and I was really happy that I got to experience it with them, if not my family.
At Auschwitz, that was when I really saw my deeper comprehension of the Holocaust coming into play, because we were with our tour group, contained with our guide and our group, but then there were tons of other groups around, and people weren't being as respectful, they weren't understanding it as well as we did. And when I was at Auschwitz, I felt like our group was really together, and we were really being incredibly respectful and just fully able to comprehend these sites.
The camp that I found that it had the greatest impact on me was Auschwitz, but it was the first one, and more specifically, it was the display that had the human hair. This is an experience that I still talk about to this day. I remember we had a tour guide, and we were walking into a room, and I had my camera out. I was trying to take notes, take photographs, and the tour guide said, "You cannot take pictures in this room." I didn't even know what was in the room, but as soon as I walked in, I just felt kind of this presence, and I started bawling my eyes out. And then I saw the human hair, and I think that's the most real moment I've had on that trip, because it was something that just really connected all the dots, all the missing dots. And when you go to these camps, you can't experience it the same way the victims did, because you don't have that same sense of fear, of anguish, of worrying about if you were going to live to the next day. But I think in that moment, seeing the human hair, looking at my hair, touching it and feeling it, it was just an experience that was very, very much too real for me.
At Auschwitz, when I was just completely speechless, and when we saw the cans of the gas and the human hair in one of the rooms, I just fell apart. And I'd known that it had happened, and I'd seen photos of these exhibits already, but being there was a completely different experience. And hearing other people crying in the room and just being in that somber space, it really made an impression with me, and it's something that it stuck with me after as well.
I just couldn't comprehend the enormity of the Holocaust. And then I got to Birkenau, which is just massive, and I sort of was able to better visualize what happened and be like, this is where these things happened. It happened like right here on this ground that I'm standing on, and people lived in these buildings and people worked here. And to see those buildings made it more real to me and just more understandable. At Birkenau, I think our group saw this like level of respect that we had that came from our year of studies that a lot of other people didn't have. For example, we saw groups of children playing on the train tracks, the train that carried prisoners into Auschwitz-Birkenau. Children were playing on the train tracks running out in the opposite direction, which is incredibly, incredibly disrespectful. I don't even have words. There were these groups that were consistently being loud and chatty and laughing and giggling, and we were all just so disgusted with them. And it took away from our appreciation of Birkenau and our ability to understand it. Our guide yelled at these kids to shut up and told them to appreciate where they were and what they were doing. And that was a really, really powerful moment. And I think it was really good for us to see, as something that we talked a lot about after Auschwitz, was like appreciating and understanding the Holocaust and like the grounds that you're walking on.
One of the most powerful museums that we went to was the Jewish Berlin Museum. There's a few exhibits in this museum that really hit me in a certain way that just was really special. One of them was called the Garden of Exile, and it's basically you walk outside and it's a concrete slab that's kind of slanted, and there's big like poles on it, and you walk around this concrete slab and you get this really uneasy feeling, and it's pretty unsettling. It kind of makes you feel sick and like you just kind of want to escape and like leave the garden itself. And so I thought that was really powerful because it kind of shows like the feelings surrounding the Holocaust. And another exhibit in the same museum was the Fallen Leaves, and it's just this hallway filled with metal faces, and when you walk on them you get this like really weird sound that almost sounds like screaming.
I'd been to Berlin before, and the first time I went there, I thought I was going to hate it because I thought that there would be so many memories of Nazi Germany and so many bad things that would remind me of what happened to my family. But the first time I went, I saw how integrated the memorials were in the city. And I remember thinking, okay, they're doing a good job at remembering. They're not trying to cover up their past. And the second time I went there, after I had learned even more about the Holocaust and learned more about the events that happened in Berlin and around Berlin, it was even more impressive what they've done and what they've continued to do since I'd been there in the past 5 or 6 years. And I appreciated that, you know, you could be walking on any street in Berlin and look down and see a stumbling stone, just like the one from my great-grandfather, and be reminded that yeah, something awful happened here, but something positive can also happen, and like the Jewish community has gotten stronger, and it was this awful thing, but they're not pushing it away and they're not pretending that it didn't happen. So I really appreciated that. And even the fact that the Holocaust Memorial in Berlin is in the middle of the city, you can't miss it. It's giant bricks like standing out in the middle of the city, reminds you that it's integrated in everyone's life and it's a part of their history and it's not going to go anywhere.
Treblinka made the biggest impact on me because that was a death camp, and the memorial was just a lot of stones and I don't want to say rocks, but almost like boulders, and some of them had inscriptions of where people were from, and just to see the 1,000 or so rocks spread out was just so impactful, and to think about how that was not like barely a fraction of the people that died there was really impacting. And there was no museum, so you just walked in and they were just rocks everywhere, and it was really moving to me. Just walking through them, you just felt different. Like, I just can't describe that feeling of sadness and all these headstones that could be headstones for a minimum amount of people that were executed there.
We went to Treblinka right after going to Auschwitz, and I remember thinking that the two were so wildly different as memorial sites. There wasn't a lot of structure. There wasn't like a lot of infrastructure marking, where things happened, or all of that was destroyed. So you had to kind of create and put in your own knowledge of what had been there before to understand what had happened. Definitely a lot of emotion coming out of it.
We learned a little bit about Treblinka in class, but I was kind of intrigued enough to do some research on my own. And I watched a bunch of documentaries and read a bunch of books about Treblinka, and particularly kind of the archaeological excavations that have been going on in Treblinka. And I know it was just amazing to see the actual tiles from the gas chambers. They were made to look like bathhouses.
We basically traversed through woods on no path, just went through the woods looking for the sites of where these mass graves were, which they were marked, but they weren't accessible by foot. I get the impression that not many people go there, and that we were probably the first in a long time to seek them out.
It was a very interesting experience just to see how no one pretty much knew it was there besides our tour guide, because she had done a lot of research on it, and how without her we would have no idea there was a memorial from a killing site out in the middle of the woods, because there was no signs or anything really about it.
I was especially surprised to learn just kind of how Hollywood has dramatized the Holocaust in a way, and how it's not everything is as uniform as the Hollywood makes it seem. So for instance, the differences between Eastern and Western Europe, they experience the Holocaust in very different ways.
Coming from a Jewish background, that was basically the extent of my knowledge surrounding the Holocaust, and I think these courses and the trip together collectively made for a much more complete understanding of what we call the Holocaust, and how it's not just a single narrative that can be told, because there's so many different aspects that come together within this time period, and how there are different experiences from what happened in the West to the East, and the different groups that were persecuted as well. So I think that was just interesting to learn about all these different factors that contributed to this one aspect of history.
I think now I have a much more complex view of what happened, and a lot of personal narratives and names that I can refer back to that really shaped my understanding of what the Holocaust was.
So when I first started the course, I didn't think this would be the answer that I'm giving you. I learned that I don't know as much as I thought I knew, because when I decided to take this course, I said, I know everything there is to know about the Holocaust. I read so much on it. I learned so much in high school and grade school. But the more and more that I read, the more I said, wow, there is not one experience that can define everything. There are not even a handful of experiences that can accurately sum up what everybody went through. So I think this year-long course has been an adventure for me, in the sense that I learned so much more that I thought was even possible to learn about one specific subject. And I think it really did broaden my perspective on a lot of things, because when you study the Holocaust, you not only study the actual events that happened, you study psychology, you study history. It's just so many factors in one subject.
Before the class, I thought I knew a decent amount about the Holocaust, but taking the class made me realize that Holocaust education, especially in high school, is significantly lacking, because I actually didn't know much or anything about the Holocaust. So after this program, to actually have a greater understanding and also know all the events, especially the history side, and then critically looking at the literature and movies that have come out about the Holocaust, I think it's something that's not done much, is to look critically, especially on movies like Schindler's List, that mostly everyone has seen, and to look at them in a critical way and an analytic way on like, well, what is really accurate and what's the story behind it.
A lot of what I knew about it before just had to do with the Jewish community, and a lot of it also just had to do with my family, because as much as I was interested in everything else, that's really pertained to me, and that's what my family shared. But after the class, I learned about all the other groups of people that were discriminated against and that had to deal with the same things that the Jewish population had to deal with. I knew that there were other communities and populations that were persecuted, but the extent to which I learned in class really broadened my understanding and showed that there was so much hate, and people were fearing so many different people just because they didn't know about them or they just assumed things about them. And learning that it wasn't just the Jewish populations, but also gay people and also the gypsies. They felt the same persecution, and it kind of just made me want to learn more about other people and make sure that I understood their culture so I wouldn't judge them for something that's not true.
Like when you look at today's refugee crisis and make parallels between the attitudes that are still around today and the attitudes that allowed for something like the Holocaust to happen, like those things still exist. And I think educating young people about the Holocaust can help change that.
The first thing that comes to mind when you say that is very much the Syrian refugee crisis. I'm very interested in international law, and over the summer I studied at the London School of Economics, and I took courses on humanitarian rights and international law, and we talked about the Nuremberg trials a lot. We talked about the refugee crisis in 1939 versus the one that was happening in recent years. So I think having the Holocaust contextualized, I'm able to better assess events that are, I don't want to say similar, but that have reoccurring patterns in current events.
Right now, something that it has directly impacted is the refugee situation happening. It's easy to say that you don't want to let refugees in to mess up our economy, but when you look at what happened back then, on how that exactly happened, and we had an opportunity to save thousands and debatably millions of lives, and we just said, our economy is really good right now and we don't want to mess that up. And that is just appalling to think that we said, you know what's worth it, economy over lives. And currently we're doing that again with our refugee situation. Although our administration is letting refugees in, the public is still feeling that way of we don't want to let them in and all these things. And I think people need to realize this is not, I mean, it's kind of similar situations if people are dying and we're choosing to save our economy over people's lives, and that's just not right.
So learning about the Nazi regime and learning about how much hate could be instilled in people just because they fear something and they don't know everything about it is very relatable to what's going on right now, and playing off of people's hates just to get elected or just to try and form a community is scary because it's what's happened now, especially after the election of Donald Trump, and it's just teaches you how important it is to know everything and learn everything you possibly can and not just fear something because you don't know everything about it. And learning about the Holocaust and how Hitler came to power and learning that he was just instilling these fears in people in order to gain popularity, in order to have these people trust them and have people think that he can help them by himself is very relatable to right now. I hope that our society is better prepared for what's happening and we're more accepting than people were when the Holocaust happened and when Hitler came to power, but it's still extremely scary.
you.